Hi, this is Todd Sexton. Today's training is going to be on how to overcome objections. We're going to talk about the most common objections that come up when you're making a pre-arrangement or a final expense presentation. The first is we already have life insurance. We are too young. The kids, family, or wife will take care of it. We might move. We want to think it over, and we can't afford it. Now, we'll be talking about which one of these are excuses and which one of these are truly objections. You'll notice down here at the bottom it says the best way to overcome concerns and objections is before they occur. So I'm going to be going over actually a little broader presentation on how we actually deal with each one of these items. Uh, You've probably seen the training on our training site on how to actually make a pre-need presentation. Before we actually sit down with the family, there's a small time period, usually a 5 or 6 minute time period that we want to take advantage of before we sit down with the family, either at the dining room table or we're going to be at a conference table. So this is prior to the start of the pre-need presentation. This is called the warm-up. And what actually is a warm-up? Well, it's when, asking questions is a way of getting acquainted. So you're going to want to ask some questions, but it's also a chance to preempt any objections or concerns. That means that we can start laying the groundwork to handle these objections or concerns before they come up. So here's some important questions that you might want to ask. Do you have children or grandchildren? Do you live here in town? Where are you from? How long have you lived in this area? Do you ever plan on moving away from your children or grandchildren? And then after you've completed that little warm-up period and you've moved yourself over to the dining room table or the conference table and you begin the presentation, you'll notice these slides that I'm using are also the slides that are what we use for our pre-need presentation. This is the very first slide, and you'll notice the question number 2 says, have you ever discussed your own final arrangement wishes with a close family member? This is a very important question, and this is one that begins that process of overcoming objections, or at least setting up a stage so that when a question does come up, we can refer back to this question. So it's very, very important that this question be asked as you begin your presentation. Then we move through the presentation. I'm not going to go through it. I'm just going to kind of give you a quick overview, show you a couple of the areas that we've placed in this presentation that are useful in later overcoming objections. It's very important to ask and make note or make the statement. For example, it says 70% of the time it's the wife and the kids who have to make the difficult decisions of making the final arrangements. Here you'll see in the picture, and it's very important to point out that, mom or grandma is sitting here, and this is her family that she's surrounded by. And when she passes, if she's not taking care of things in advance, it's these children or grandchildren that are going to have to sit down with the funeral director and make those decisions. So be sure you point that out, because we're going to be using this as a means of overcoming an objection here in a few minutes. So again, on this slide, it's very important that you touch base on each one of these items. Then as we move through the presentation, we have the different presentation slides. You'll go through the arrangement guide with them quickly. Then you'll move into explaining what is involved in a funeral. You'll show them what your funeral packages are, and they'll probably pick one, whether it's traditional or cremation, and you may calculate payments for them. That's when our common concerns come up, and so that's when we generally are going to deal with them directly at this point of the presentation. So again, let's talk about the first one. We have life insurance. Is that an excuse or an objection? I say it's an excuse. Here's how we handle that. Life insurance, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, is a good thing, but it should be used for helping the family with living expenses, medical bills, and replacing lost income once that loved one passes away. What it does not do is it doesn't stop inflation from rising funeral costs. So insurance alone the cost of funerals double almost every 10 years. So with an in-place life insurance policy that's not connected with the funeral in any way, um, it means that when that policy pays out in future years, you're going to pay the cost of the future year funeral. Whereas by planning in advance, as we've already talked about in another part of our presentation, you actually stop inflation because that funeral home will guarantee prices at today's prices with a final expense or a funeral policy that's connected with their mortuary. It doesn't remove the emotional burden from the family for having to make all those 120 difficult decisions. Insurance doesn't do that. And, it makes sense to leave in place their life insurance and add a funeral policy for final expense. It's just a smart thing to do because it's specific and it has a specific purpose, whereas life insurance is much broader. The next one, it says we are too young. I say that's an excuse. Death is no respecter of person. Death happens every single day. You can go and pick up the obituary, and you can get a newspaper, look in the obituary today, and you'll see people listed of all ages, from infants that are only minutes old all the way up to people that are over 100 years old, and all people in between. So there's no way that we can predict death, so you're never too young to think about planning in advance. Then we have another one where they say the kids, the spouse, the family will take care of it. I say this is an excuse, and this is where this comes in. I will refer back. When they say to me, the kids or somebody will take care of it, I'll refer back and say, well, remember a few minutes ago during our presentation, I made mention that 70% of the time it's the wife and kids that have to take care of this. And you saw that, a picture of a grandmother with her children and grandchildren surrounding them. I also say to the family that the best thing to do, your kids, they really don't want to know and they don't want to help in the planning of your funeral. It's difficult when it happens. So it's best for you to go ahead and get it taken care of and then just let the kids know that's done. That's what we recommend and that's what most families do. So it's not a good idea to leave it for the kids or the spouse or whoever. The next one we have is we might move. This is an excuse. We talked about this in our warm-up, and the reason why we ask these questions are, and here are the questions that you ask in your warm-up. If they have children and grandchildren that live locally, it's unlikely that they're going to move somewhere else as they retire and are seniors. The other question, do they live here in town? Yes. How long have you lived here? If they've lived here for a long period of time, again, this is where their home is. This is where their friends, their family are living, their extended family. So when they say to me that we might move, I always bring up, well, a little bit ago we were talking about the fact that you've lived here for quite a long time and both your children and grandchildren still live here. You're still living in town. So it's really, a funeral and final arrangements are for the living. They're really not for you. So imagine if your children had to travel hundreds of miles to go pay their respects to you or even go to a funeral at that point in time. So the fact that you might move is probably not likely, but if you were to move, the insurance that goes along with funeral and final expense planning is portable and you would be able to take it with you. Now the next one we have is I want to think it over. This one's very common. I say it's an excuse. That's why I mentioned in the very beginning, on the very first page of your presentation, we kind of set up to answer that objection if and when it comes up. And we asked the question to them, have you ever discussed your final arrangement wishes with a close family member or a spouse for that matter? And the reality is that probably they never have had a serious conversation. They'll tell you that, or if they do, they'll say, well, it was just brief and it was 10 years ago and my husband really didn't want to talk about it, so we never really got it talked about. So I say to them, I refer back to this first page. I said, well, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, remember when we first sat down here and I asked you a question, have the two of you ever have you ever talked this over? And you told me, no, you haven't, or you told me it was very brief. So the fact is, you've been married maybe 30 years and you haven't talked talked it over, uh, and so now you're saying you want to think about it. I recommend that you allow me to help you with it tonight. Let's get your questions answered. And by the way, what is it exactly you want to think over? And you'll get silence. And the reality is, what they want to say to you is well, it's really the money. It's not really that we want to think anything over. It's really the money. And sometimes I'll even suggest that with a question: is it the money? And then it comes up, well, yeah, we can't afford that. Now we're talking about an objection. So of all these items that are listed here, it's the last one that is really the only objection that is a true objection. Everything else is an excuse. And when they say that we can't afford it, what I hear them say is well, we just need to find something that'll fit into their budget. So when they say that, I want to be in that conversation. And so I might say to them, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, a few minutes ago, we picked out a program, a plan, and the payment was $100 a month. And let me ask you this question, Mrs. Jones. How much can you do if you can't afford $100? How much can you do and get as close to that as you possibly can? And what they'll sometimes say is, well, we could probably do $70 a month. So from there, I will either adjust the funeral plan, or I will adjust the 3, 5, 7, or 10-year payment options so that I can get it closer into their budget. So once we adjust it and we've met what it is that she can do, it's most likely that we'll be able to get this finished up. And always remember to ask for a check. And so once we get to the place of asking for, when they've picked out an amount, a payment amount, then I'll say to them, well, Mrs. Jones, would you like to write me a check for that, or would you like to put it on a credit card? We can actually make a first month's premium right over the internet and get this thing started pretty quickly. Which one of those would you prefer? So that's how I usually close it out, and that's how we handle these objections. So thank you for listening to this training, and have a great day.